Merci beaucoup, Vanya. Thank you very much. I do think that there were a lot of questions that might have been answered, and I'm sure that there's many more questions and answers to be had as time goes forward. Alors, merci beaucoup. And as the day goes on, we will be talking about the state of heritage in Manitoba, that piece of paper. I think that's pretty important. But we've got two people that will come and kind of talk to us about it. First, we're going to start with Cindy Tugwell, who is the Executive Director of Heritage Winnipeg. And Cindy, I'll introduce you. Is that okay? A little bit? Yeah, Cindy's with me here in the studio. So Cindy has been with Heritage Winnipeg for over 28 years and was Manitoba Governor of the National Trust for Canada from 2006 to 2012. One of the most visible faces in the media pertaining to current heritage conservation issues and Heritage Winnipeg's leadership which includes projects such as the redevelopment of Upper Fort Garry Park, Millennium Center preservation, and the redevelopment Armstrong's Point book publications, and involvement with creating a heritage conservation district, along with digital projects. Are your cheeks red? Because that's a pretty impressive resume. Anyway, come on, Cindy, come on.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am speaking briefly about the goals of the inaugural Manitoba Heritage Summit last October and our objectives, which were focused on the challenges and opportunities faced by Manitoba's heritage sector. The idea of a Manitoba Heritage Summit originated in the early 2020 when the 8 provincial heritage agencies were discussing innovative ways to collaborate for our annual Partnerships project. On behalf of all Manitobans, our organizations work tirelessly with limited staff and many wonderful dedicated volunteers to advocate, educate, and promote our causes. We are a diverse group of nonprofit organizations that represent our province's social, cultural, and built heritage. Although we are passionate about our work, we are faced with similar challenges and needed to become more effective, have a louder voice, and increase our impact on the community we serve. This summit was conceived as a way to raise our profiles, educate the public, and solicit a better understanding of what our challenges currently are and where we can advocate for better opportunities moving forward. The Heritage Summit was a collaborative approach to tackling common problems while ensuring a sustainable future for all. Identifying opportunities and planning a feasible strategy that benefited everyone. Recognizing strength in numbers, the province's entire heritage community was invited to pursue these goals at our first ever summit in October 2020. It was a celebration of Manitoba's heritage, a chance to connect with other heritage professionals and enthusiasts, facilitating long-term planning on key heritage issues, and raise the public profile of the heritage sector. With nearly 400 participants, the summit was a public forum where panelists spoke on a wide range of topics in heritage. It was a great success with heartfelt discussions, awareness being raised, and it was a great, increased transparency and greater inclusion within the community. We also identified the need to improve our services and effectiveness by embracing cultural diversity, improving processes for sharing, advocating more effectively, and making use of new digital technologies to expand our audience and improve our social connections. We have seen many positive developments this past year as a result of the summit, continuing through to today's event. We got to know each other much better by name. In many cases, we had never worked together in the past. By better understanding each other's work and taking a cooperative approach, we were able to support one another instead of competing. It is no longer just 8 provincial heritage agencies facilitating a worthwhile partnership project during these challenging times. It is Manitoba's entire heritage sector working together. We all want the best for the future of Manitoba's heritage, and we are much stronger when we are united. After the summit, we also commissioned a report, Heritage in Manitoba 2020, Perspectives, Challenges, Opportunities, and Recommendations. It identified the many challenges we face, such as decades of insufficient funding, which has greatly impaired the heritage sector. As our responsibilities continue to increase, our lack of capacity only continues to be amplified. This report can be beneficial for our supporters, our potential funders, helping them better understand the state of heritage in Manitoba. The report has also been provided to the provincial government in hopes they use this as an effective tool to better grasp our role in the heritage sector by highlighting the challenges, opportunities, and recommendations from the summit participants. It is important to know our history to improve our understanding of the present and make better decisions for the future. The Manitoba Heritage Summit is for the benefit of all Manitobans, providing a virtual platform so that everyone, everywhere can participate. The 8 provincial heritage agencies truly believe that if we continue to work together, we will become more effective at illuminating the important contributions of the heritage sector to society and ensuring key issues such as the need for increased funding for capacity are addressed. Increased monetary and in-kind support will help provide for future sustainability, enhanced community services, and much better leadership. By protecting and expanding our contributions, we can increase the quality of life for all Manitobans for generations to come. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Cindy. Now, our next speaker, I'm going to go like this. Oh, there we are. Now, our next speaker is Tracey Turner. And Tracey is reaching us from elsewhere, but let me introduce you, Tracey, quickly. So Tracey is the Executive Director of the Manitoba Historical Society and currently the Collections Manager for the St. Norbert Provincial Heritage Park. She is currently pursuing doctoral studies as a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Manitoba and holds her Master's in Arts, Curatorial Practices from the University of Winnipeg and a Bachelor of Human Ecology from the University of Manitoba. And I've seen Tracey present a variety in the past, and I'm always fascinated at her approach, very innovative. Wonderful to have you in this position, Tracey. It's all yours.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and I'm so pleased to be here. I'm here to share with you some of the feedback that we received after the Heritage Summit in 2020. So we have a lot of things that helped inform our current day here today. So I'm going to be sharing my screen and giving you a presentation this morning. So we received our feedback in from a number of different sources, from the chat box that you can see happening today during the webinar, from the post-event survey that we sent out via email, from individual emails that we received in our email box, and from event post-mortem discussions with the Manitoba Heritage Summit group. Most of our attendees were found to be from the museum field last year. This was closely followed by citizens interested in heritage and from libraries and archives. As you can see, 54% of people were attending the event mostly from Winnipeg, followed by 40% from rural Manitoba. When asked how important heritage was to our participants last year, 86.3% responded that it was very important to them. We were so pleased to see that 43% of respondents last year thought that our event was excellent, and 44% rated it as good. And this was such an encouraging place for us to build from for this year. 65% of our survey participants shared that they enjoyed the panel discussions most. 33% shared that they enjoyed the Provincial Heritage Agency statements, and just over 28% enjoyed the keynote speakers. By far, we received the most positive feedback about the Decolonizing Heritage in Manitoba panel last year, with 53% of our survey participants making that as their favorite. while the panel sessions on challenges and opportunities for heritage in Manitoba followed closely in popularity. When asked what our survey participants found the most useful, we received many insightful and guiding comments. The diverse variety of perspectives presented, our panel discussions, the sense of a more cohesive, collaborative approach for future heritage advocacy, the virtual format, an inspiring program, the open communication between groups and heritage people, the questions that came up around the future sustainability and engagement with younger generations, sharing issues about financial insecurity for heritage groups, both urban and rural, the role that heritage played in economic development and tourism in Manitoba, a feeling of better awareness of what other organizations are doing and sharing of collective heritage ideas. And the main statement that really had profound impact, the event opened up the lines of communication amongst us. So in order to improve upon our 2020 event, we collected information on what our event attendees also disliked. And one of the most popular critiques that we received reflected on the lack of inclusion of youth in our panel sessions. After careful planning and selection this year, we responded so that our Youth and Innovation in Heritage panel is completely populated by younger heritage professionals and practitioners. And you can look forward to that later today. Another common critique that we received reflected on the lack of diversity to ensure representative voices considering age, gender, culture, ability, and class. In addition, we received a fair bit of commentary in the chat that there was an overrepresentation of male organizers and voices. We have responded with a much more diverse and inclusive approach to the selection of panelists and session topics. This year's panel on diversity and heritage and Indigenous initiatives in heritage are just two examples. There also has been a more balanced approach with respect to all panels to reflect a broader representation of heritage issues, practitioners, and professionals in our heritage community. And finally, a widely received comment from participants was to provide more how-to information, success stories, and dialogue that focused less on complaining and more focused on strategizing. And we have responded by the selection and encouragement of our panel session participants to discuss their active, future, or recent past heritage projects, successes, challenges, and initiatives that they have been involved with in Manitoba. It is also our hope that through the compilation, discussion, and sharing of the Heritage in Manitoba 2020 report, that this critical information helps to guide all of the heritage community strategies forward. Another critique we received was that the event was a bit long. However, 56% of our respondents shared that they preferred a day-long event. Nearly 40% might have preferred the event over a series of half days, but for simplicity, we have retained a day-long format. While the pandemic has changed us in so many ways, when asked what people would prefer for this type of event, 40% offered that they prefer a hybrid event, a combination of online and in person. We hope to offer that format in future summits. Of course, funding and the need for more funding is an ever-present conversation for the heritage community in Manitoba. And when asked about the important question as to what role the government should play in ensuring the future survival of heritage organizations, 55% of us shared they felt that the government should play a very important role, and 31% suggested an important role in ensuring the survival of heritage organizations. The message is clear. When asked if our participants would attend future Manitoba Heritage Summits, over 88 responded with yes. And we took that as a very strong voice for the Manitoba Heritage Summit group to continue on with this dialogue this year. And finally, I'd just like to share that following today's event, we will be sending out a brief survey. Please send it back to us, as we love your comments. They help guide us to improve and innovate the content that we present here. This is such an exciting program today, and I am looking so much forward to the energy that everyone is going to bring to this discussion. Let's have an impactful day, and thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Tracey. That was very informative, and I'm sure will pay off in the future for future summits too. But we're not quite done talking about we're going to continue the discussion, I should say, of the Heritage of Manitoba 2020 report. Mais cette fois-ci, ça va être avec des panélistes, d'autres gens qui vont venir faire les discussions. Oh, I skipped someone. Excuse, I made a mistake. J'ai fait une faute. I turned the page too quickly. My mistake. I missed Ken. Ken, you're there. Sorry. I forgot to highlight. It's my mistake. Complètement ma faute. So, Ken Storie, you're going to give us an overview of the report before we discuss it. It makes a lot of sense. So, Ken, I'm going to leave it to you. Voilà.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's exactly what my task is today, is to give you an overview of quite a lengthy report. And I'm going to attempt to just touch on it. I'm going to be short on details because I'm sure you've all read the report or are eagerly awaiting reading the report. And I'm just going to go over a quick outline and mention that this report is based on, extensive input from each of the provincial heritage agencies and extensive chat about it over the past year. So quickly, I'll outline what's in the report. It starts off with a review of last year's summit, and we've heard about that, and I just have to say that last year's summit in a way was about possibilities. And the next component of the report was a profile of each of the 8 provincial heritage agencies. And it looked at their activities, at their challenges, their opportunities. And so our job was to look at common elements and unique situations. And I think the report about each of the agencies provides us with the sort of the scope and variety of heritage activity in the province. The appendix to the report also gives us some information about other heritage organizations around the province. The next component focuses on the role of government and the role of the Historic Resources Branch. And as we learned today, there are changes, and we look forward to those changes. But when we look at what's happened in the last 10 or 20 years in heritage, we have to reflect upon the fact that at one time, the Historic Resources Branch fulfilled a number of very important roles. They were very active in research, in producing publications, in producing inventories of heritage sites and locations, very active in commemoration, supporting communities when they decided to commemorate a site, a person. They were a point of information access for the public, for municipalities, and they were I think above all, a source of expert advice, a body of knowledgeable people that could answer your question, whether it be about the roof of a church that was in need of repair or the heritage value of a particular building. So those are things that many of us involved in heritage really valued. And we're quite concerned that over the last 20 years, there's been quite a decline in staff, and the report has a chart outlining that. And so you have less people. There's got to be less function, less product, less involvement. And so we look forward to hearing more about positions that were have been vacant and maybe refilled. And we look forward to seeing how the role of the Historic Resources Branch might be impacted by the recent changes. Now, getting on to what I think are the more important parts of the report are the challenges and opportunities. And the information about this began with last year's Heritage Summit. And as I said, gleaned from submissions from all the heritage agencies. Of course, at the top, no surprise, funding issues. And as we look at funding issues, we have to look at two aspects of the funding issues. One is the dollar amount. And the appendix of our report outlines in quite a bit of detail the changes that have happened over the last 10 years as a starting point. And it's one thing to say, even if funding appeared to be stagnant, that's one word, or declining, when all the costs are increasing, and also the opportunities and the changing realities of the world, all the things that were mentioned before, whether it be about inclusion, about colonialism, there's all kinds of expectations. So when you have expectations increasing, ideally you would like the funding to go along with that. The other aspect of funding is the process. And so I kept hearing from different people that basically the process of each year not knowing what's happening in the next year, it's unstable, it's uncertain, and bottom line, inefficient. And so we look forward to discussions about how we might change that. In summary, there's this general feeling that heritage is just not high enough on the priority list of governments at all levels. And I'll repeat, we look forward to hearing what can happen in the future if we get a little more discussion and collaboration. On a positive note, the whole concept of endowments is interesting. We've learned a bit about saving heritage buildings, the importance of having viable uses for those buildings, and the possibilities with innovative fundraising and foundations. There are several things we can look at doing. And I guess now to the most important part, recommendations and vision. So our section on that looked at 5 elements that we have to look at as provincial heritage agencies. Advocacy. We have to find better ways of getting the message out there of the value of heritage. There have been studies, there's been lots written about it. Investing in heritage activity is good for tourism, it's good for businesses, it's good for communities, it's good for the soul. And we have to keep working to get that message out there. The topic of inclusion, it's already been talked about this morning, and it's on the top of all our minds, embracing diversity, covering the breadth of history, and finding new ways of capturing different histories. Next item, collaboration. That's what this is all about. That's what the summit is all about. Shared services, shared ideas, possibilities. Next item, innovation. And just to highlight a point here, it's more, everyone thinks about technology, but it's more than technology. It's about new ways of thinking as well, going along with new technologies. And last, and certainly not least, is leadership. And this ties back to our concerns about the Historic Resources branch and the different types of leadership that have been shown there over the years. And some of those staff positions aren't there right now. And so leadership, as other people have already said this morning, leadership from the provincial government, all governments, is really kind of important. In dealing with the big issue of funding, the agencies sort of put their heads together and come up with some considerations and concerns. It's all fine to say we need more funding, but you also need to justify that and sort of focus on why you're asking this. So we've already dealt with dollar amounts and stability, key things, sustainability and adequacy. Rural museums, capacity, having trouble getting enough volunteers. There are all kinds of aspects to that. And along with inclusion and trying to find ways of dealing with that, dealing with new technology. Everyone knows that new technology costs, but it's more than just the upfront costs. It's the training costs, it's maintenance costs. And so there are all kinds of reasons why maybe doing a great job at heritage is a little more expensive today than it was 10 years ago. Two issues relating to human resource issues. And when we say human resources, again, it all comes back to funding. One point that came out quite strongly was the importance of paid positions in all agencies, in all heritage organizations, the stability that paid positions provide, and that a lot of heritage organizations feeling a lot of pressure in terms of retaining volunteers and volunteer burnout. And so that, as again, human resource issues tie back to funding issues. Well, I think I've tried to race through that. And I would like to end by actually reading the final comment out of the report, the final recommendation summary that's in the report. And as I said, in the interest of accuracy, I will just, if you permit me, to read that final two paragraphs. To the Manitoba government, our most pressing recommendations relate to the funding of provincial heritage agencies and to the funding of the Historic Resources Branch. We call on the Manitoba government to increase funding to levels resembling what the province provided 20 years ago, adjusted for inflation. Funding should be offered on a multi-year basis at a stable and predictable level, indexed to inflation, and reviewed in light of changing expectations. Funding should be adequate to allow for each provincial heritage agency to be able to provide a minimum level of paid staff, thus ensuring standards for continuity, expertise, and leadership. Part 2, there has been a significant erosion of Historic Resources Branch services, especially to rural Manitoba. The leadership provided by specialists in the area of building preservation, heritage sites commemoration, and heritage site identification should be restored to the levels seen in the 1990s. Alternatively, provincial heritage associations need the resources to carry out those roles. So with that little request, I thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a good day, and I'll say farewell from out here in Treaty 2 territory, and we'll continue from there. Thank you very much.
Bravo, Ken. That was wonderfully done. A great summary. Now, just avant qu'on aille avec Michel, I just want to invite all the participants, everybody at home. We've been sitting for a little while. We've been staring at our screen for a little while. My wife is an occupational therapist, and she told me whenever I do these things to remind people to don't stare at their screen for hours at a time. So if you haven't taken a screen break at this point, please do stare out the window. And it's 2020 is sort of the idea. So for at least 20 seconds, you want to look at something that's 20 feet away, and it's going to help your eyesight and your concentration level for the whole day. Alors, allez-y, take that time, take a deep breath. Là, entre-temps, Michel, tu vas avoir ta chance à présenter tes invités, et on a quand même un bon 45 minutes. Hein? Alors, si ça va un petit peu plus long, 45, c'est correct. All right. So I'm going to leave it to Michel. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup, Robert, and welcome. Represented aging males, but I'm nevertheless very glad to be here with you. Right now, I'd like to get right into the discussion. We've asked three wonderful panelists to comment on the report that Ken has tried to summarize in quite just a few minutes, and thank you very much for doing that, Ken. So right away, I'd like to go to our three panelists in the interest of saving some time. Our first panelist is Roland Sawatzky. He completed his PhD in archaeology at Simon Fraser University in 2005 with an emphasis on historic domestic architecture. Research interests broadly include the settlement period in Manitoba after 1870, architecture, Mennonite history, and material culture. He was a senior curator at the Mennonite Heritage Village for 11 years and has been the curator of history at the Manitoba Museum since 2011. He was the lead curator in the development of the new permanent Winnipeg Gallery in 2019 and involved in the new permanent Prairies Gallery this year. Other recent major exhibitions include Divided City, the 1919 General Strike, Legacies of Confederation, Changing Views of Manitoba History, and Nice Women Don't Want the Vote, about, of course, the suffrage movement in Manitoba. Roland, thank you for being here. Over to you.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, I read the report carefully through a few times, and I have a number of comments on it. But I'd like to preface by saying that my comments may seem critical. It's a critique of the report, but the report is good. It does what it's supposed to do. It celebrates the work of the provincial heritage agencies. It outlines what you all do, and you do great work. There's no question about that. I appreciated the summary that just came out of the report for everyone. And some of the things I'm going to be talking about were mentioned in the summary, but what I really want to say about it is that I think that the report could be much bolder. I think you mentioned the opportunities, but I think that those opportunities could be at the forefront, could be foregrounded in the report. So I'll begin by saying that there's one point in the report where it refers to obligations, opportunities, and expectations, and how they've grown for the PHAs. And I think that in the report, it's really important to start with that, to say, we have pressures and people are expecting things from us. What are those expectations and obligations? Right from the start, who are the constituent populations who are demanding this? Then it goes on to recommendations, especially to the provincial government, about increased funding. And it's quite understandable because all of these organizations are underfunded by a lot. But I feel that there are two shortcomings with the stance in particular. One is that it refers to returning funding to the levels of the 1990s. And as mentioned in the summary, that might not even be enough. But I think in the report, it should at least state what that level is, what the expectations in terms of actual dollar amounts are. And I know it's a draft at this point, so that could be something you add in. And as mentioned in the summary, 2021 is not 1995. It's a different world, right? So why wait? Why not, make those sort of demands right now in this report? Be bold. And then the other thing in the recommendations is for stable funding. And we all know that stable funding is, sort of a genie in the bottle. It's the dream, but it never happens. And I would say that in a democracy, it almost can't happen because governments change, priorities change, the world changes. And it feels to me, after being in the heritage industry for 20 years, that there's no such thing as stable funding. If there's a plan for 3 years and that can be repeated, that's as close as you'll get. But even then, you get things aren't pegged to inflation, governments change, etc. And if the government can't even give stable funding to education or healthcare over time, then why do we expect that in the heritage industry? And so I think that's just a political reality we have to live with and expect major fluctuations, and then work with groups like the HRB to, I guess, even that out over time. And this discussion of funding recommendations brings me to a major question I have for the group. And this is something you might want to consider putting into the report at some point, is what is your leverage to attain funding? How can you put pressure on decision makers to attain real funding increases? And this was also mentioned in the summary. which I think is really good. The heritage industry, the agencies do excellent work. They do good work for the population of Manitoba. Politicians know this, decision makers know this, everyone knows this, but that's not enough to give extra funding. That's not an inspiring thing to give extra funding. It just means you're doing a great job. And so how do we then put pressure on governments and politicians? So the question then becomes, who's the audience for this report? Is it politicians? What are the pressure points for them? And I would say it's their constituents, because politicians, while they may individually have an interest in heritage, their real interest, and this might sound like realpolitik, but their real interest is in pleasing and persuading their constituents, the people who vote for them. And so I think bringing pressure points on popular views of history right now is really important. And again, upfront, right at the beginning of the report. So here's some examples that I just thought of, but there could be many other things too. How many young people will be hired with extra funding? How is a racial, ethnic, or faith group being underserved by the current system? And how are these groups voicing their concerns? How exactly will the funding be used to decolonize Manitoba history? What is the goal in years to see certain changes? So I think that once you get pressure like that, it makes politicians and decision makers think more about their role in heritage. It seems like that the Heritage Summit of 2020 was very successful, especially in finding important voices to talk about financial stability, decolonizing heritage in Manitoba, rural Manitoba, and youth technology and green sustainability. The list of the speakers is fantastic. But I don't see the results of those discussions in this report. You mentioned them, and they are talked about at the end as important things. But again, this is where the energy is. This is where the pressure on politicians comes from. This is where we can get a vision for what the heritage of the future might be. It says on page 6 of the report that a position paper will be developed to be used for strategic planning and to foster engagement. And in my view, again, why wait? Well, I think this report should be that position paper. The people of Manitoba are demanding a reckoning with our history. Now is the time to meet that reckoning. I heard and the report and the chart showed also that the decolonizing heritage in Manitoba was by far the most popular session and had national viewership. That could be the emphasis of this report, a proven need for a large-scale change. Truth and reconciliation is, after all, about history as much as it is about moving forward. And that can be the focus here. And that can be tied to increased funding and increased collaboration. I very much agree with reconstituting the HRB in some fashion. And I know that now there are changes happening there, so it'll be interesting to see how that works out. I think that their leadership is essential for making some of these, meeting some of these challenges systematically over time. But I think that the government, politicians, will only do this if they see and feel a clear and urgent need. And I think that's something that could be added to this report, is that sense of urgency, that sense of now is the time for major change. The government should be our partners in this. And I think that the HRB, or whatever that's called now, is ready for that step. I mean, they're ready for change, obviously, as well. And so I think there's a real opportunity there. Some of the recommendations in this report, I feel, seem to be about regaining lost ground. I would encourage you to develop a visionary expansion of the goals of the PHAs and HRB, backed up by demonstrated urgency and present social concerns, and really some very serious reevaluations of our shared history in this province. So that's the end of my review.
Thank you very much, Roland. Those were very useful comments, and I hope people will take them to heart, because there's a lot of material there that should lead to some very good thinking and some discussion in the coming weeks and months. I'm going to move right away to our friend, Shelley Sweeney. She's the retired head of the University of Manitoba Archives and Special Collections and librarian emerita. She was responsible for the administration of the archives as well as the rare book room, and focused on donor relations, acquisition of records, reference, and public outreach. She participated in the bid to receive the archives of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and co-led with Deborah Young the establishment of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation at the University of Manitoba. She has studied and worked in archives since 1981, and has a Master's Archival Studies from UBC in 1985 and a PhD in Archival Enterprise from the University of Texas at Austin in 2002. Thank you for participating, Shelley, and over to you.
Great, thanks. I'm going to share my screen, and essentially this is going to be a commentary on the report, but not in the same way that Roland has approached it. I think that the report does adequately highlight some of the challenges. Obviously, it could be even more impactful, but I think that the main message that I took away from the report was that without adequate staff, the provincial heritage agencies are completely dependent on volunteers. And as you know, there's several issues with volunteers. They're wonderful. They've been the lifeblood of the heritage sector, but the volunteer pool is aging. And so therefore, well, not therefore, but I guess the volunteer pool is shrinking because the younger volunteers who would step up and work with the heritage sector, often they're in precariously employed positions. They're underemployed, so they are managing or juggling several jobs. And there is a different approach, I think, that younger people approach working with heritage organizations that we haven't completely accommodated. And I think that was a little bit missing from the report, is this engagement with younger volunteers, because they do not think the same way that the core of older volunteers thinks, and we will be in some ways still dependent upon them in the future, even if we did get staff for our PHAs. The volunteers that are currently there are suffering burnout, and this leads to significant turnover. It's been a real problem with organizations such as the Association for Manitoba Archives. So as the support from the Historic Resources Branch has declined and staff have been reduced, then basically what's been happening is the PHAs and larger institutions have tried to pick up the slack. Well, people that are in large institutions already have super heavy workloads, and yet they are very aware, as I was, that you can't leave people floundering. And I was very much aware that there was only so much support that I could give, say, an organization in Northern Manitoba from my desk in Winnipeg. So I think that really does affect adversely the rural and small heritage organizations, that they have really lost out in this. I think that that is where the PHAs are key, is in spreading the training opportunities, the knowledge, the support to these organizations. So new challenges, we've talked a little bit about that. I think the pandemic has actually shown us several things. One is we need to increase our electronic presence really quickly. We have been, I think a lot of organizations realized that before the pandemic, but we were just kind of, moving in a very, solid and substantial way, but nothing like what our audiences are expecting. And the pandemic has really shown that up. And particularly for archives, that's been a real lifesaver, was to be able to connect to people all across the world, frankly, and to be able to send out material electronically to these researchers. So I think that we're at a real crisis point, because the people that are staffing our heritage institutions need assistance and training to deal with electronic media. And there's also the issue of electronic media that has been produced by small rural organizations, and they need support in terms of the longevity and preservation of this both born digital and digitized material. And in some cases, some organizations have, or institutions, volunteers, small community groups have produced really valuable material, and they have nowhere to lodge those electronic records. So volunteers in the PHAs can't provide or even arrange adequate training for heritage institutions that can't afford to pay for their own. We need to help our heritage institutions decolonize, and I can't stress that highly enough. That is a real important aspect of our moving forward with reconciliation. Well, how do you do that when you don't have that training and awareness? We also have to help increase heritage coverage and diversity. I am sure that people can appreciate that if you are a white middle-class archivist, that you don't have the same insights into collections from the South Asian community, for example. You don't have the same type of connections to these people. And so therefore, our holdings tend to be very, very monolithic and not racially diverse, and not diverse as much as they could be in terms of small groups or racialized minorities. We need to help increase social justice. So that is something that we have to work with organizations to help them, or institutions, I should say, to help them to grapple with this. And severe climate change. This is impacting all institutions, and somebody needs to be out there that will provide some good, solid advice and direction in how to prepare for this. And then, of course, we need to advocate on behalf of institutions for more resources so that they can also get more staff to deal with burnout. There's lots of good news, and I think that this could be highlighted a bit more in the report. There is an ever-increasing societal interest in heritage. I have seen personally in my institution, there was a real surge of interest in heritage. Audiences for heritage institutions are growing. You would sort of expect that there might be a lessening, but in fact, because of that electronic component, archives and museums and other organizations have been able to reach out to totally new audiences that we were not able to reach before. So there's an increase in interest in records that lead to equity, transparency, and reconciliation. So we're getting a lot of feedback from individuals out in the community that they are interested in these how our records, how our objects and artifacts and monuments can contribute to these. And then, of course, heritage organizations contribute to a sense of belonging, a cultural identity, and self-reflection and understanding. So the pandemic has shown that citizens really value the enrichment provided by heritage organizations. People are looking for meaningful experiences. Manitoba is an old community. It is a multi-million-dollar investment for the government to promote heritage within within Canada and internationally. There are millions of dollars that come from this investment. The pandemic did provide major challenges, but there are major benefits. It's been a lot easier to communicate with people who are in remote locations. People are more familiar, and there are substantially less reduced costs to reach out to people. What I thought was interesting, and what I'll sort of kind of finish with is I looked at how we compared to other prairie provinces. Now, this wasn't part of the report and could be material for future reports, but for the Association for Manitoba Archives, the Archives Society of Alberta gets $175,000 per year. They have a full-time executive director and archives advisor, a part-time administrative assistant, database administrator, bookkeeper. They've got an office. They have professional development grants, bursaries, biannual conference. They did used to be funded by lotteries, but that has moved to general revenue. And they did receive a significant cut last year. The Saskatchewan Council of Archives and Archivists, a much smaller province, they receive $191,000 per year. They receive it in 3-year grants. And ordinarily that's indexed to inflation. Because of the pandemic, it's flat this next 3 years. And again, you look at, they've got full-time advisors, 2/3 time executive director. They give grants. They have special assistance for Archives Week. In comparison, the Association for Manitoba Archives gets $28,400, and it's like a part-time office administrator, office space, and some daily operations. No archival advisor, no grants program. Everything is run by volunteers. So if we compare these resources, you can see that Manitoba, maybe if you compared Manitoba to Alberta in their heyday, but certainly Saskatchewan is not, rolling in dough compared to Manitoba. So archival organizations are not unique. I'm sure that this pattern is replicated with other heritage organizations. So how do we get out of this loop? Well, PHAs must advocate for themselves in the first instance. Obviously, you can collaborate when you've got time and resources to do so. And you can also provide support to institutions to do things differently. But we need to re-engage the provincial government in heritage, and we need to engage federal and municipal governments as well. We can also look to other organizations and call on others. Arts organizations in general have done better than heritage. Libraries have been building new buildings across country across the country and reinventing themselves. How have they achieved this? We need to engage with other organizations outside of heritage. We need to call on individual citizens, as has been noted, and we must acknowledge that we can't do it ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Very interesting thoughts there as well. Food for thought. I'd like to know before the day is over if some of us may have access to your notes. Both you and Roland have provided some really interesting food for thought, so maybe that would help project this day forward as we work on future reports and advocacy. I'll move right away to our third and last panelist, Al Thorleifson. He was born and raised in Baldur, Manitoba. He taught high school at Nellie McClung Collegiate Manitou for decades and retired from teaching in 2011. The realization that rural students had little access to primary archival sources led him to begin working to provide access for all rural residents to documents which contain their history. This has led to the development of the Pembina Manitou Archive, an open access digital archive, which currently hosts over 53,000 documents from over 100 Manitoba communities. Al negotiated the digitization of the entire collection of documents in the Royal British Columbia Archives Nellie McClung Fond. Al has also written numerous articles and monographs highlighting events and people from South Central Manitoba. He's currently working with the Boundary Trail National Heritage Region on partnerships with rural museums, the goal being to ensure accessibility of the archival collections of these rural museums. Welcome, Al. Thank you for participating, and over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start, first of all, by commending the Manitoba Provincial Heritage Agencies for preparing this report. It outlines each agency's missions and describes their heritage interests and goals quite clearly. The major focus of the report initially comes back repeatedly, as others have also mentioned, to heritage funding. Sometimes the arguments presented are insufficient. They need to consider, for example, where is the consistency in agency-wide logic for our funding levels? Why are there not consistent criteria for funding that are presented by all 8 agencies to the government when they request? Given the stated intention to work collaboratively, would it not be appropriate to set consistent criteria-based protocols, such as, for example, could some funding levels be based partially on agency membership? Such a protocol would encourage each agency executive to actively communicate with potential members and perhaps thereby to encourage active membership in their agencies. Several agencies also provide advisory services and member workshops, either remotely or through site visits. If such advisory services were documented by date, type of service, time spent on each request, and the number of workshop attendees, such documentation again could help justify funding levels. Similarly, given the cost of publications of newsletters or magazines, perhaps a funding formula based on the number of copies printed, the number of pages, and a base rate for layout could also be written into a funding formula. In other words, funding levels should be accountable across the collaborating agencies. With regard to the Historic Resources Branch, it is obvious that the branch has lost much of its funding and that the government has apparently other interests. The report recommends funding, quote, a body of trained, centrally located professionals, unquote, similar to the HRB staff in the past. That's interesting, but there are other report recommendations which suggest that this model is no longer appropriate and perhaps based on what we heard already from Vanya this morning, there is a recognition that there has to be a broadening of their approach. But here's some examples. Universities over the past decades have trained many new and more diverse members of heritage-minded in heritage-minded programs. Many of them are young women. Yet there's a tendency to transfer funding to where other diverse individuals are to be found, whether that's in the community centers of North Winnipeg or Cross Lake or Birtle. So university training is one thing, but let's not forget that there are many heritage-minded people who don't have a formal training and will also need support. Restaffing of the Historic Resources branch would necessarily require respect for the stories of underrepresented cultures, and for credibility's sake, these communities would need to see themselves in the staff of the HRB. Similarly, restaffing of the HRB should focus on recognition and funding supports for grassroots research and publication, grounded in the authorship awareness and personal narratives of underrepresented communities, not just reports written by university-trained staff. A critical component of the new Historic Resources branch, as several others have mentioned, should concern digital media, training in website construction and writing for the web, digitization of fragile document collections to ensure their preservation and accessibility. Critical to this is also training concerning the limitations of digital sources, their storage, and the protocols which must be in place in perpetuity to ensure their preservation. There are also other limitations with centrally located collections, and I note this is a rural point of view. As noted above, the report affirms a focus on central locations for resources and of collections. Has this project been effective, I wonder? Here are some not that good examples. For example, the Legislative Library, it initiated in the 1970s a program to photograph the provincial heritage newspapers for microfilm. The original newspapers were deteriorating. They were photographed and the microfilm was made available to researchers at the library in Winnipeg. Some urbanites may not recognize that this makes these files largely inaccessible to rural researchers. This protocol has continued. However, these microfilm collections were and still are photographed only in black and white. In the 1970s, newspapers began to include many more colorful photographs which, when photographed in black and white, lose their clarity, even in grayscale. Since the 1990s, many newspapers are prepared and sent to the printer in PDF format and in full color. The Legislative Library still receives the print copies of these issues, and they are still photographed in black and white and made into microfilm. The microfilm copies are of much poorer quality than the original digital PDFs, but the library does not have the funding to store and make available the digital PDFs. There seems again to be a disconnect here, given the importance the historical community is placing on digital media and preservation. Similarly, for decades, rural communities have been encouraged to donate their heritage collections to centrally located heritage museums and archives. This is not always the best practice for preservation and accessibility's sake. For example, all of the items found in one ancient site in southern Manitoba are currently in the Royal Ontario Museum. They are not accessible to Manitoba researchers, and have certainly never been seen by the majority of citizens living within a 100-mile radius of where they were found. One collection of photographs from 1900 to 1908 were found in a farmhouse in southern Manitoba and were donated to the Legislative Archive in the 1970s. When local researchers were told of this collection, the Legislative Archive was asked about them and whether they were available. The Legislative Archive staff indicated they had no record of the collection of photographs. Luckily, after they searched, they did find them, but the collection had neither been accessed nor was it properly stored, nor did the archive have any idea who appeared in the photographs. With the help of members of the originating community, the majority of this collection has now been identified as to date, place, and persons. Again, however, the Legislative Archive does not have the capacity to store and preserve digital research on this collection. Why one wonders what the benefit was to have the collection collect dust in the archive for decades. Someone will certainly tell me that there is just so much material in the archive that there is no way that they could address all of it. And of course, by this statement, my point would have been made. The collection should still be in the community where the photographs were created. The point is that in most cases, heritage materials are best preserved in communities who can identify them and identify with them and have an interest in their accessibility. Perhaps funding which supports such heritage research and the housing of collections locally should be part of the Historic Resources Branch's mandate. We know that repurposing of already existing heritage architecture has been the most environmentally efficient plan for the future. That was addressed last year at the summit. The lack of an appropriate home, for example, of the Winnipeg Archive, well, that's a very good start, but certainly not the only one. Many rural museums are housed in heritage buildings which constantly need repair and restoration. Many archives and museums do not have the infrastructure to provide climate-controlled spaces to preserve collections such as those mentioned above. Retrofitting heritage architecture to house and preserve heritage collections would promote heritage preservation in these local communities. With regard to the agencies themselves and their memberships, the report addresses the effect of low membership, the aging of volunteers, and rural depopulation on the viability of museums and archival collections. Many of the millennials interested in heritage research would love to support our agencies, but they would be much more willing to serve if they could first find jobs in their field of expertise in the province. Several agencies quite rightly seek to draw in the next generation and their support. This would certainly be improved with the use of digital sources and social media as part of their plan. In their explanation of their committee structure, several agencies refer to their bylaws, and this may seem a little bit on the edge of the issue, but I do wonder whether the majority of the agency board members are actually aware of the content and protocols of their constitutions. Here are a few issues that I think actually might affect the way people respond to our organizations and our agencies. First of all, our bylaws and constitutions, which were accepted by Revenue Canada when most of our agencies were initially granted charitable status, these constitutions would not pass muster with Revenue Canada if we were to apply for charitable status today. Another example, Some constitutions still use the term he, H-E, to indicate what a certain board member should do. This pronoun has not been sufficient or adequate in Manitoba since 1916, yet it's still in use. Today, when gender diversity is such a critical issue with many of our millennial generation, we should ensure that our constitutions address all instructions to a role, as in, quote, the treasurer shall, unquote, rather than using such pronouns or he, she, and they to direct board activity. Similarly, if our interest is to encourage membership in our organization, each board's most active committee should be their membership and public relations committee. Similarly, our constitutions must include guidelines for a process of nominating a new executive each year to bring on board new members with fresh ideas. Yes, there's a need for volunteers. There's no doubt that rural depopulation means fewer volunteers available to maintain local heritage sites and collections. The partnership between the Boundary Trail National Heritage Region and the Pembina Manitou Archive, for example, has already shown the viability of the report's suggested regional approach. The Pembina Manitou Archive, as was noted in the introduction, hosts accessible digital copies of documents from over 100 Manitoba communities. This approach allows communities to maintain custody of their original documents and artifacts while making their collections digitally accessible to all worldwide through an open archival approach. Regional partners are also encouraged at the same time to adopt preservation standards for their collections. One limitation of this approach, of course, is, as the report noted, the lack of high-speed internet in many rural areas. As internet services improve, however, Zoom meeting formats will encourage participation in rural and remote members in the planning and promotional activities of our agencies. In summary, this report is most effective when it approaches and promotes a more inclusive, accessible approach to heritage, which connects underrepresented groups and the younger generation with the lives and interests of their ancestors. Funding agreements which look to the future and promote web-based interaction will be most likely to encourage enthusiastic young staff, volunteers, and donors, even when they can only attend or use the archives or museums via Zoom. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Al. Again, a lot of very good points have been raised in the last few minutes. I know we're running out of time, and Robert will have to try to keep us in line here. So Robert, you're the boss here. Do we have time for a couple of questions?
Deux, trois. Ouais.
Deux, trois questions rapidement. Does anybody have a quick question? And if anybody wants to respond, I think I'll have to ask you to keep your responses fairly brief, just in the interests of time. Unfortunately, we're running out of it. Any comments or any questions? Somebody's asking, is there a central registry of all heritage groups? I doubt that very much, but does anybody know anything about a registry of heritage groups? I'm seeing people shake their heads. I doubt very much that it exists.
Michel, I think that in the report, it actually addressed that by saying that they had to go online and search for these various groups. So I'm pretty sure that there is no central registry.
Yeah, and I know it's going to be coming up this afternoon as well, so we'll come back to that question this afternoon. Is there any other question, quite quickly? I'm seeing none in the chat, unless somebody has something else to add. I'm going to have to close it down here simply because time is running out on us. I'm sorry to have to do that because I think the three panelists have really presented some wonderful ideas and some ideas which will require further thought as we move ahead. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your participation and your attention. Robert, c'est à vous.
Merci beaucoup, Michel, and all the panelists. That was wonderful food for thought. We will be taking a break. Alors là, on prend une petite pause. Mais je vous encourage, durant la pause de 10 minutes, so it's a 10-minute break, we will be taking a virtual tour du Centre du Patrimoine. Alors, c'est une tournée virtuelle. Alors, we've been sitting by our desks looking at our screen for a while, and I remember taking tours, and when I was touring, I was walking. So, if you haven't done any exercise this morning, allez-y, levez-vous, suivez la tournée comme vous voulez, as you're capable. But if you haven't moved since this morning, time to stretch, time to watch this in the comfort of your home, as if you were really on tour. Alors, dans 10 minutes, on va se retrouver. I'll be playing a little bit of jaw harp to call us back. So if you happen to step away to get another coffee, go to the washroom, don't worry, you'll hear the music before we start back up in about 10 minutes. Okay? Alors, enjoy the tour.